Hi, this is Janice.
And I'm Sarah N.
And we're your hosts for Explore This, a podcast for the modern day working professional.
Each week, we explore actionable insights on how you can thrive personally and professionally.
Hi everyone, today's a very special day because we are doing our very first video recording of the Explore This podcast.
Long time coming.
I know it's really been a while and we're so excited we get to do this today. So for those of you who are used to tuning to us on Spotify or other streaming platforms, this is your chance to also tune in to us on YouTube so you can see all of our faces here today. And we'll be sure to leave the episode link in our episode description. And here on the Explore This podcast, we don't just speak about career development, professional growth, entrepreneurship as well, but we also aim to touch on topics that, the modern day young professional like Crystal, Sarah, and myself really care about. Which is why in this episode, we'll be speaking about fertility preservation and specifically on egg freezing. We're really excited to speak about this because we know that this topic of fertility is not something that is widely or very much openly spoken about at all. But for most women, we know that this is something that will be on our minds, especially as we inch toward the 30s, which, spoiler alert, all three of us are in. Yeah.
So not only is today the first time ever that we're bringing a returning guest from season 1, but Crystal, who is also a very close and dear friend of Janet and myself, has taken the hot seat today. Not so hot, hopefully. And she will be sharing with us a very personal and intimate journey about her own experience going through the egg freezing process, which happened, I believe, in the late December of
November,
December of 2022. And so more than just the process of it, she'll be deep diving a little bit more into everything from the process, the experiences, the emotion, and everything in between, things that you and I would want to know, especially if you are considering this process or if egg freezing is something that you'd like to know a little bit more about. So Crystal, to kick things off, we're very excited to have you. Thank you so much again for doing this. Long time coming, as you have said. And for some of our audience or most of our listeners who might not have known of your background, maybe share with us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Janice and Sarah, for having me. It's good to be back. So I'm Crystal. I work in the field of marketing, currently working as a digital nomad. So I work remotely for a company based in US, a real estate concierge app, but I'm based here in Malaysia, and I've pretty much been working for the past 12-ish years.
So for those of you who don't know also, I personally know Crystal from the time that we were kids, basically. So our friendship goes way back, and then Janice and Crystal know each other, all of us, through Asia School of Business, where we all did the MBA a couple of years ago now. But it's been an incredible journey as we have learned so much along the way through our friendship with Crystal as well. So Crystal, I remember that you are also the first friend I know personally. A lot of times we read about people doing egg freezing on TV, reading on books, but from a personal basis, you are the first friend that have gone through this experience. And I remember, you sharing with me your thought process from the time you were first considering it, exploring it, to the time you actually committed to doing it. And you've allowed me to go on that journey with you. And so I'm very grateful that you're actually amplifying this story with the rest of our audience today. So maybe let's start with, why did you decide that it's an important topic for you to come on the podcast to talk to us about?
Wow, that's such a good question. I think for me, this whole journey started, even though the whole actual egg freezing process started at the end of last year. It was a journey that took a few years because I kind of always knew that I liked kids. I wanted to be a mom and have kids and have a family at some point. But I think in your 20s, it's very natural to think that you have a lot of time. And the main trigger point for me to start thinking more seriously about my priorities was actually COVID. I was living in a different country, working in Finland, and with a different partner at that time. And at the start of COVID, when it really started to spread across the globe in the early 2020, was also when I turned 30 in February 2020. So turning 30 and then going through this big global pandemic that was escalating at that time really made me rethink a lot of my life priorities and really question what was important to me. It led to me making a few decisions like coming back home to Malaysia to be closer to family and community that I grew up with. But it also made me question my priority and how much importance I place on being a mom. Because if I just wanted to rush towards meeting a certain timeline in order, to avoid that ticking biological clock, so to speak, then my priorities in how I search for a partner would be quite different. Be things like, is this person ready to have a baby? Financially, are we stable? But then I realized that the more important priority first was finding a compatible partner who shared the same values as me and a similar lifestyle and similar goals in life, like what we want to see our lives looking like, how we want to contribute, what would our careers look like. And so because I hadn't met that kind of person yet, I realized I made a conscious choice to deprioritize having children, even though I was entering my 30s. And because I read, I educate myself on this, I know that the prime period for a woman to have children is in her late 20s to early 30s. That's when your fertility kind of peaks. And then it starts for most on average. Of course, there's always outliers, but on average, women's fertility begins to decline quite quickly after 35. So I kind of knew that I'm entering this period of my life where I literally have this 5-year window. So am I going to prioritize meeting this 5-year window? Because it's not a guarantee that I'll meet someone that I'm compatible with, I share the same values with, vision for life with. And it's not something you can really control or rush, like finding a job or working on your fitness goals, which is within your control. Finding a partner who can meet you at the right point of your journey and journey with you is something you can't really control.
Definitely.
So I think I made it a conscious choice to prioritize that, knowing that I would take on the risk of maybe having a bit more trouble having kids later on if I wait till I'm older.
And so in the whole, grand scheme of things that you're considering, how then did the idea of like egg freezing specifically come about then?
Yeah, so then when I knew that, okay, I'm not going to push myself to rush to get married and have kids before 35, what then are my options? One is I just leave it and naturally,
what will be
will be. If God wants to grant me kids, He will grant me kids, even if I'm like 40. But I'm also quite logical in that I believe that, we're given technology and science for a reason. So there are many options. And initially, I always saw fertility treatments as something that only couples who can't have kids would go for. Then as I started researching, I realized there's many reasons to preserve your fertility by freezing your eggs, even as a single woman. For example, some women have frozen their eggs and then later on down the line, they could not have predicted it, but were diagnosed with cancer. They had to go for chemo and they were glad that they froze their eggs because then later on they could retrieve their pre-chemo eggs, and continue to be on a journey of having children. And there are also couples who were able to have their first child naturally without any issues. Then later on, they decided when they were ready, they wanted another child. But by that time, the woman is older. So it was hard to conceive naturally. So then that's when the frozen eggs came in handy. So I realized that there are so many reasons besides just expanding your timeline, but you can't predict the future of how your health will be, how your body will be, what you might get diagnosed with in the future. So I realized it's kind of like the reason we buy insurance. You buy insurance hoping not to use it, but you buy it so you have more options. And so egg freezing made me realize that I don't have to rush this search for the right partner and I can give myself options to find the right person, but also still prioritize what is important to me, which is being a mom.
I'm so curious, at that point of time when you were exploring this journey as well, did you have any close friends who were on this journey or who have been on this journey that you could even speak to them? Or did you feel that it was something you're exploring in that season of your life, quite alone in that sense?
That's a good question. Because I started thinking of it, I think earlier than a lot of women who do, the term is social egg freezing, where you're not really struggling with fertility yet, but you freeze your eggs for multiple reasons, like I mentioned. So I think for most women who do social egg freezing, they do that when they're kind of approaching that window of coming to their late 30s. So it was early. I did start thinking about it earlier. And so I didn't really know anyone my age who was also exploring it. I knew people who were curious as well and kind of on the same thought process as me, but not seriously going to the extent of seeing a clinic and a doctor. But I was really fortunate because I did speak to older women who were in their 40s and had gone through a divorce like I had. And because, we shared that thing in common where we've both been divorced, they were able to speak quite candidly to me and ask me, Crystal, what's your plans? Do you want to have kids at some point in the future? And I said, yeah, I really do. And then they just said quite candidly to me, if you haven't thought about it, I would recommend you seriously consider freezing your eggs. And so I asked if they had done it, and then they said, yeah, and I wish that someone had told me to do it earlier, because by the time I did it, I was almost close to 40, and my body was not where it was when I was younger. And then I had to do a few rounds to get the optimal results in terms of the number of eggs and the quality of eggs. Yeah.
Let's also take a step to appreciate the fact that, Crystal has this courage to come up here to share with us, because we recognize, like we say, it's a really personal and intimate journey. And also Crystal's first time sharing it on a more public forum. But also let's take a step back and, get back to basics. And maybe Crystal, ask you in your own words to define egg freezing. Now we want to put a caveat here. Neither of us are medical professionals, so none of us are giving any medical advice. And this episode is really about Crystal sharing her experience having gone through this process. So maybe tell our audience about egg freezing as you know it.
Yes, I'm glad you put that disclaimer that we're not medical professionals, because I'm an art student, not a science student, and technical terms get very lost on me. So I'll just explain in very layman terms, not using any of the jargon, like follicles and all these kind of things, follicle count and all that. For me, it's just, as I understand, all women are born with a specific number of eggs in their body. Every cycle you release some, and then as you grow older, your reserve of eggs kind of goes down, and that ideal window is before 35, right? And so the whole process of egg freezing is putting your body through a series of hormonal treatments in the form of injections to produce an optimal number of eggs during your next cycle when you go through the egg harvesting process, so that they can harvest as many healthy eggs as possible and store those eggs in some kind of frozen condition. Again, don't ask me the term. So that later on, when you're ready to use those eggs for an IVF process, those eggs will still be in the condition that they were when you froze them, even though you might be a few years older.
Thanks to our good friend ChatGPT, I have the definition of egg freezing. Don't quote me on this, quote ChatGPT, but I'll just refer it to the process of harvesting a woman's unfertilized eggs and freezing them via a method called vitrification. I hope I said that correctly. I'm happy for any of our medical professional friends out there to clarify this for us, to preserve them for the future. So thank you so much, Chris, for sharing with us your egg freezing definition.
Yeah, and I would say, to echo what we mentioned earlier, right? It's not something that is widely, even spoken about in Malaysia as well.
Yeah.
So really hoping that, the conversation that we have will help you clarify any questions that you may have, or if you're thinking about it right now, we'll also be talking about the process of what it entails, anything to look out for, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so let's get into it, Chris. Take us back to the time when you were first considering to freeze your eggs. What were some of the concerns or fears that you had running through your mind?
Before I jump into the concerns or fears, I also want to come back and reference something that both of you said, which is like, it's a very personal thing to talk about this topic, especially in Asia, in Malaysia. And part of the reason I think that's the case is because people can be very presumptuous and judgy about your personal life choices, like whether to have kids or not to have kids. It's something that would come out at literally every family or social big gathering. People would ask, if you're not married, when are you going to get married? If you're married, when are you going to have kids? And it's not even the question of, first of all, do you want kids? Second of all, are you capable of having kids? Because it can be very painful for someone who is struggling with fertility to actually say that I want kids, but I can't, my body doesn't let me, you know. So I think there's a lack of sensitivity that I don't think comes from bad intention. It comes from lack of awareness. If you really knew how much pain your question would cause, then probably you might not ask the question in such a way. So I mean, I'm really grateful that you have created this platform for people to talk about these things, because I think the more we normalize these conversations, then the easier it will be for everyone to have these questions and weigh these options and make smart decisions. Yeah. So I think for me, concerns was, first of all, I think being able to consider egg freezing is something that I would say that I'm very blessed to do, because it does cost money. So having the financial capacity to even consider it is a big blessing in itself. And then secondly, I have also have the privilege of being educated and in environments where I would be exposed to opportunities to read about these things, to talk about these things with older people who have been through this journey. So in that sense, it didn't seem so massively scary, or alien an idea. But I think it was also true that I was wondering, how am I going to, is this a financial decision I want to make at this point of time? Do I want to invest in such a significant 5-figure amount to do this? That was one concern. Then the other concern was, like you said, because it was quite early in my journey that I was considering this. Not many people my age I knew were doing it. So there was the consideration of, am I emotionally ready to do this? Because finances are one thing, but it's a really big step to choose to go through such a procedure, undergo a surgery, and make such a big commitment to making this a priority. And then there's the whole hormonal injections which affect your mood, could potentially lead to mood swings. And I wasn't sure, like, because I didn't know anyone personally who had gone through it, I wasn't sure how I would react, how I would respond to those treatments, and like whether I would be emotionally ready to handle it. Yeah,
I feel like that's, you raised a very important point, right? There's so much more to it than just like financially, can I afford it, or even physically, what's the sort of impact that it would create on your body, because every woman is built differently. You might react to certain hormone injections, different from the woman next to you, even if you're the same age. But there's also like the emotional aspect as well. So thanks for raising that. So it sounds like you've actually done so much research, right? Like, I'm sure, knowing you, Crystal, you would have like spoken to people, done all like the web research, called up doctors and whatnot. Curious to hear from you, when you went to your first sort of medical appointment and spoken to the doctor that you've chosen, what were some of the questions that you raised that you felt were important that anyone who's considering it also raised with their doctors as well?
First thing I asked was to understand step by step of the process, in terms of my time commitment and financial commitment. Because at the beginning, you do need to make quite frequent trips for them to check that everything is okay. And then while you're doing the 2-week process of, the hormonal in shots as well, you need to, in between, go back to the clinic so they can see how your body is responding. So I wanted to make sure that I had the time to be able to go for all those multiple appointments, and to do it continuously. Because I was also I'm also the kind of person that I travel a lot for work and for leisure. So making sure that I could commit to all those time slots that I needed to was one. And then financially, like, is it going to be paying for this one lump sum? Is there an installment plan? Is the payments chunked? First of all, can I commit to this? And then when I realized I could, then the next questions were more getting to the nitty-gritty of, first of all, what could go wrong? So if I'm paying this amount of money, what are the chances I won't get a harvest that is good? What are the chances that, my egg count will be low, or they won't be in a good condition to be frozen? And then the other questions were, what can I do to optimize it? So then things like, what kind of supplement should I be taking? How should I be managing my lifestyle in the months leading up to doing the procedure in order to get the best possible results? I think those were the three main categories of questions.
So I think one thing I'm curious about as well, right? Like, after you ask the doctor these questions, and I'm sure there will be some sort of evaluation on your egg health, do they do these tests on you before deciding that you are suitable to be an egg freezing candidate? Or generally, if you're willing to pay, if you seem on paper quite healthy, then they proceed?
So I was very grateful that I had a very good doctor. So the first person that I went for consultation with, Dr. Helena from KL Fertility Center, I actually decided to just continue with her after that initial consultation, because she answered my questions, I felt, very honestly, very transparently, and coming from a place of caring for me and my optimal health, not trying to just get another customer in. So because of that, I decided to continue and just do the rest of the procedure with her.
This is not a sponsored post,
but we're open to it.
We are.
Yeah, and I think she made it very clear upfront that there will be a series of screening tests to do first. So a blood test, an ultrasound, some tests to determine some levels of some scientific term in your body. All those screening tests are to determine if you are a good egg freezing candidate. So they'll look at the condition of, your they'll scan, they'll look at the condition of whatever they look at in an ultrasound.
And it's a transvaginal ultrasound, right?
Yeah, they stick something in.
Yeah.
It's basically like going for a pap smear, if you've gone for a pap smear. So there's definitely going to be a wand that's going in, and you can see, you'll be lying down and then you can see what it's scanning, like an x-ray on the screen, and it will be moving around, and she will talk you through, okay, this side is looking good, this side is looking good. And there's also blood tests. Blood tests, as I understand, is more to check, like, do you have any hereditary conditions that you could be passing down to your children if you have children. And it's just a very standard blood test. So if you've already done like a medical checkup in the last year, they can just use those results and you don't have to retake it again. Then they just check different things in your body, different levels of things in your body that is important to produce healthy eggs. So for me, one of the things that came back was that my vitamin D levels was a bit low because I spend most of my time indoors. So I needed to boost up on my vitamin D supplements. So only after they do those checks will they tell you, okay, you are suitable for a candidate for egg freezing, or you could still freeze, but there are these potential considerations. They might not get what they want to harvest at the first try. You might have to do a few rounds. That might cost more money. They might tell you all these things. A lot of women also have irregular cycles, or they have a condition like PCOS, which also makes it complicated because this whole process follows your monthly cycle. So I was very fortunate because after all the checks, besides some things minor like just low vitamin D levels, everything else looked really good. And the doctor told me, you're really healthy, you're actually a prime candidate, you should just do it now. Yeah.
Actually, to be honest, right, Sarah, it sounds like to be honest, I don't know the state of my egg health.
Neither do I. Time
But
to get it checked.
yeah, it sounds like, honestly, even if you decide not to proceed with the egg freezing, process anyway,
Yeah,
these kind of tests give you a lot of, knowledge and awareness
Absolutely.
on like, the state of the health of your eggs.
yeah,
And that helps you decide whether it's something you should, you want to act upon and, start, trying for a child soon or
Mhm.
delaying it or even undergoing treatment,
hmm
taking supplements.
Yeah, I
It
think
gives
that-
you more power. Like knowledge is power.
Yeah,
Exactly, yeah.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
I was not married when I did this whole check. I'm not even engaged, right? But let's say I were engaged. The results that came back were telling me things like, actually, for your age, your eggs and your womb are in great condition. So if I was someone engaged, just doing that scan would give me a lot more confidence of, okay, now time to get married and start making babies. So it's just having that information.
Yeah.
They even tell you like your egg reserve, how many are left, like how many you typically produce each month. So you actually know these things. So even if you're trying to conceive naturally, you're going in with more
Informed.
awareness, and it's not, because it can sometimes be an emotional thing. I mean, I know couples who have trouble conceiving, and sometimes they don't do these scans until after months or even years of trying, and it can be very emotional because when you don't know, then it's like, is the problem me or is the problem you, or is the problem both of us? And this is all just purely speculation when you can actually just know through one checkup.
Yeah. So I think fundamentally the idea of going for the test, both the transvaginal transvaginal
It's an ultrasound, basically.
the transvaginal ultrasound, as well as the blood test. It
Yeah.
can tell you so much already. And from there, you make an informed decision. And obviously with the consultation of your doctor, whether or not you want to proceed with the egg
Yeah.
freezing, which is what you did.
And even if you don't proceed, it tells you what lifestyle changes you need to make,
Oh,
like what
yeah.
supplements I was
Vitamin
missing.
D.
I mean, I take multivitamins regularly, but I didn't know I need more vitamin D, So it's things like that. Now I know.
it makes me wonder, why is this not even compulsory for all women turning 30 or something like that? Yeah. But let's also dive into, the entire process once you have made the decision post this checkup with the doctor, and you've decided that you want to proceed with the egg freezing process. Maybe I assume there'll be multiple stages. Why don't you walk us through those stages?
Yeah, so it was really straightforward after doing those tests. Basically, she said that you can start anytime during your next cycle. They'll tell you at which point of your cycle, which day of your period to start. And then you basically start administering hormonal shots in the form of injections to your abdomen for 2 weeks. And that kind of primes, in my own language, okay, this is not medical language, primes the eggs for being ready to harvest. And then at the end of the 14 days, they do another final check and ultrasound. And you can actually see the size of the egg has grown bigger.
Oh, wow.
You can see it on the camera screen. And then you go for the surgery, which is like around half an hour under general anesthesia. So you're completely knocked out. It's a legit surgery. For me, I didn't do it immediately at the next month because, first of all, I wanted to kind of give myself a bit of runway to tuck away some extra cash for this. And then secondly, I wanted to take that 3 months of really eating healthy and taking more supplements. And then I also stopped drinking any alcohol and cut down my caffeine for those 3 months. Then I came back and did a scan, and then I started the 2 weeks of shots. So I don't know if I should go into what those shots entail. I think that's the most, for anyone that does internet research about egg freezing, the shots are the most scary part of
It's
it.
very intimidating. I mean, as a needle-fearing person,
Yeah.
hearing about how you have to self-inject, right? Like,
Yeah.
it really terrifies me.
And honestly, it's like anything else scary in life, like a roller coaster, like public speaking or like meeting new people. It's really more mental than it is actually physical.
Tell us more. How was that for you? Like,
So
And I think you're scared of needles, so are you?
yeah, I don't like needles as well. I don't like needles and I don't like blood.
That combination
Yeah.
and doing it yourself.
Yeah. So when I watched and looked at pictures online of women doing this, I got scared because some women bruise really badly. So it's basically around the fatty area of your abdomen, right underneath your belly button. That's where the needle goes in. And different stages of the 2 weeks, there's different amount of needles with different amount milliliters of the hormones. But at the middle point where it's the most, you're basically administering up to 4 shots a day on your own. So the first day, the nurse will show you how to put the first 2. And of course, the nurse is doing it. She's just like sticking it in and out. It's no big deal. And you don't even have to look. So it's not scary. But then after that, when you take everything home and then you have to go and do it yourself, that's the first time was really emotional. I was like tearing up. I remember distinctly tearing up, and then like it took such a long time. The nurse literally takes 5 minutes to prick in and out, right? But it took me half an hour of just psyching myself up to do it. And I was like double sterilizing everything, making sure this is 100% sanitized. My hands were sanitized, no infection. And then I was like tearing up and shaking because I was like, what life choices have led me to this? Because I think when you're younger and you're a little girl, you just assume, right, that your life will look like a Disney fairy tale. Like, I'll be married and by 25 and I'll have kids by 28. And then you're suddenly 32 and then you're standing in front of a mirror figuring out how to stick an egg freezing hormone injection into your abdomen. So I think that's when the reality of what adulting is hits you.
So it's not just about the bills, baby. It's not just about
and then it made me realize that if I can't even do this, how am I going to deal with it if I really have to push a baby out of my body? How am I going to deal with it if the baby has jaundice? Or the baby has, whatever the millions of potential things a baby could have. Like what a parent has to go through mentally is so much more than sticking a needle into your body. So that just the full reality of being an adult and being responsible and being a parent kind of hit me.
So, I do remember you sharing with me as you were putting in your first jab over text, and I remember just like, wow, this is such a brave step, and like Chris is just going through it alone. And I remember you sharing about how emotional that whole first time was.
Then after that first time, once the needle went in, it was like gonna sound kind of gross lah, but it's literally like pricking through the rubber latex balloon. That's how it feels like. There's a bit of resistance, right? Like if you think about pricking through a latex something, then after that it just goes in, and that's it.
When you were psyching yourself up, what were you telling yourself actually? Were you like talking to yourself, and what were you actually saying? It was
this like, come on, Crystal, if you can't do this, how are you going to do all the other things required to be a mom?
And you're doing this to become a mom potentially in the future. So it's really wow.
And at some point, you might have to stick a needle into your child. You don't know, right?
It's a good perspective shift, right? Like when you look at it big.
So if you can't do it for yourself, how are you going to do it first? And also I have also been on a fostering journey where I foster cats, and I've also taken care of really sick cats. And at some point, one cat was really sick that it was coming to the point where in the end we sent her to a vet to get the shots, but another option was for me to administer it as well, which is the same thing. You just put it into a fleshy area of your body, you pull the skin tight and you poke the needle in. So
you make it sound easy, but I'm very sure that when the time comes, I would not know what to do.
So I think it's the reason why it's not a big deal for nurses or for parents who have gone through something like this is because it's really, like I said, it's mental. That first hurdle, that first time is the hardest. After that, you kind of get desensitized to it, and then it's just like normal. So after that, the next few days, it really felt like a routine, like brushing my teeth kind of thing. So it's not actually physically painful. I think it's just the mental and emotional fear that is the harder thing to get over, because it's a really thin needle. It's not that thick. And then you put it into the fleshiest area of your belly. So physically, it's not actually painful. It's just the idea of it is kind of gross.
And so how many injections over the period of how long?
I can't remember. There were some days it's 2. The peak it was 4, but then it's basically every day, non-stop for 2 weeks.
Every day.
Wow. And you have to follow a really specific schedule. So it has to be like every 24 hours, so that like if you did it yesterday at a certain time, you have to do it the next day at the same time.
And presumably it's different for everyone, and your doctor is the one that has walked you through however many times you need.
Yeah,
over the next
exactly.
2 weeks.
Exactly, because it depends on your body weight and everything. So whatever amount they give you is only enough for you. Yeah.
Can you share with us a bit more of like the procedure itself? So take us through, I know you mentioned it was like a 30-minute procedure or something like that, right? Do they kind of put you under general anesthesia and then you black out for a bit? And then did you feel anything? And what are they doing during that 30 minutes?
And maybe just a clarification question. What's this surgery called? Like, is it with the intention of harvesting?
Yeah. So it's I don't know what happens because I didn't want to know the details.
You're like, please don't tell me. Just wake me up when it ends.
Yeah, basically that. Wake me up when it ends. But I was told it's exactly the same thing as IVF. So if you're a couple trying to, the difference between egg freezing and IVF is that egg freezing is freezing an unfertilized egg. IVF is freezing a fertilized egg and then later implanting it back into the womb. But the procedure of taking out the eggs is the exact same thing. What they do in a half an hour, I don't want to know.
All you know is that it was a successful surgery.
But all I know is that it was my first time in my life being under general anesthesia. And now I know, okay, this is just a joke, but there's some truth to it. Now I know why in all those Hollywood movies and series, those dramas, people get addicted to medical drugs because it's the most calming feeling. It's like, I feel very tired and then I'm just drifting into this peaceful slumber.
You feel like loopy after that for like a few hours?
Yeah, like you're just in this haze where nothing is stressing you out. But at the same time, you can't do much. Like you try to reach, it takes very long to get water next to you. Want to go toilet, get out of bed, it takes, you're very slow and you're very blur.
You like in that sort of very weakened state?
Oh, just a few. I think just the first day.
Okay. So second day
and then I just immediately went to bed early. So then the next day was back to normal. But there was a bit, so I think in terms of physical side effects, the range can vary. So I think that's why it's scary reading internet research because even for the 14 days of hormonal shots, some women really experience like almost like pregnancy, the early parts of pregnancy, meaning the nausea, the feeling like morning sickness and all that, really wild, extreme mood swings, crying all the time. That's why I was scared of like, am I ready for this, So I was very lucky. I didn't really experience that. There was a bit more emotions, but it was more like PMS level. Nothing like very
out of the ordinary.
Nothing that disrupted my work lah. I could still work, and there wasn't a lot of bloating for me during the 14 days. There wasn't a lot of bruising when I administered the shots. I think I have quite a lot of belly fat. Those with small lean stomachs maybe lah. Then that's why you have all those pictures if you Google online of the big bruises, right? And but after the surgery, then I felt the bloating because they actually are taking something out of what's those two tubes at the side called? Yeah, they're taking those eggs out of the tubes, and even though like they're microscopic, right? They're tiny. It's still a big part of your body. It's still a part of your body they took out. So definitely that area felt very sore and bloated, like swollen. That's the word. Yeah. So that discomfort lasted about a week and a half.
So just no exercise or whatever.
Yeah. So that was the period they say don't exercise. Don't do any heavy extreme exercise.
So Crystal, I know earlier you spoke about some of the things that, the vitamins that you took and whatnot in preparation for the whole, egg freezing procedure. But could you briefly also share with us what were some of the other preparation things you did to prepare your body, prepare yourself mentally for the days, the days and the weeks leading up to this egg freezing procedure?
Yeah, so the physical part, you're right, I did touch on that. So taking the recommended vitamins by the doctors, then being more healthy, exercising more, better diet, less caffeine, no alcohol. But then I think when it came to the emotional and mental support part, because I didn't know anyone who went through it personally, it was still quite important to me that my very closest friends and also the closest colleagues that I work with, my boss and the person I was dating at the time, I made sure that they all know that I'm going through this and the extent of it, to the extent of I'm putting a few injections into my body a day. I might be more moody, emotional than usual because number one, I think it's only fair to them in case, I don't know if it would affect my performance at work, if it would affect my conversations with those closest to me. But secondly, also for me, it was just very assuring to know that there are people in my life who knew what I was going through. And although they haven't been through that process or haven't supported someone through that process, they still supported me in the way they knew how. And just telling me that, hope everything goes smoothly. I'm rooting for you. I'm praying for you. Just that was very reassuring as well. Because I think, like you both have mentioned, it's a very personal thing. So I think to go through personal journeys like this, completely not even being able to talk about it to people, I think that makes it unnecessarily harder.
Definitely. And I'm glad you shared that as well.
Was there anything that you had to refrain from, like in the days or weeks leading up to this? So, because I've read somewhere that a few different sources that said that intensive exercise is like discouraged, but I don't know if that's a myth or not. So, did your doctor sort of warn you about things to avoid or things you should like stop doing?
I think there was at some point, but I don't remember if that was before. It was definitely more of after the surgery for like 2 weeks, to a couple of weeks. I can't remember exactly, but I think leading up to it, I don't really remember any specific restrictions. I think just the thing I tried to avoid that I also started getting really serious about from last year and still continuing into this year is realizing how important our health is overall, right? Because I also had another friend who went to do a scan when she heard that I was going through this process. And I heard from multiple women, I started hearing as I talked about it to more people, from multiple women that they had irregular cycles or they had PCOS. And I realized the one thing a lot of us have in common, probably with both of you as well, is that we all have very fast-paced lives. So we are all like career women who are like going somewhere in our careers. We're traveling for work. We're traveling for fun. We keep a busy social schedule. Our calendars are very organized, but that also tends to correlate with people who don't always give themselves enough time to rest and recharge. So I think I tried to be more mindful of sleeping more hours, just getting enough water in a day, eating more healthy. I've always been quite health conscious and I tried to do that, but I think I focus more on the fitness part of it because it's also fun and it's also social. But I started to realize that I don't want to wait until something bad happens before I even sort out my basics like sleep and water, which I was, to be very honest, not doing very well at that point.
We feel you.
Very true. So during the entire process of this egg freezing process, egg freezing treatment, how did your day-to-day life get impacted, if at all? And were there any other side effects that you experienced?
Didn't really impact my day-to-day life. Just the first hurdle of getting used to it. After that, like I said, it was a routine. Just like brushing teeth, it takes 5 minutes. It was more after the week and the 1-2 weeks after the surgery, it did feel a bit tender, especially when standing or sitting, right? When you're moving that center part of your body. So it was a bit more, I was just moving slower at that time, which I guess it's also good practice for when you actually get pregnant.
So slowing down.
Yeah.
Really like listening to your body, being kind to your body.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna kind of talk about some of the nitty gritty of things a little bit more. From conversations with some friends or even just reading up and watching videos of women who have gone through the process or are thinking of this egg freezing process, right? A lot of times I think financial considerations is something that often hold them back because we know that it's not something that is very cheap in Malaysia given the sort of technology involved for it. So we're curious to know what are from a financial perspective, if you could share with our listeners approximately how much the whole egg freezing process, don't we know there's like the evaluation, early part of it, there's the actual procedure itself. There might even be storage costs involved. So yeah, speak to us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so if you just look around online or generally, the range will normally be 12,000 to 20,000 ringgit. But that depends a lot on the reason the range is so big is it depends a lot on the individual. I was really on the lowest end of the spectrum because, like I said, I started early. So I was really pretty healthy according to all the checkups. And it was really straightforward from the shots to the procedure, no complications. So that amount is broken. So I spent in total about 15,000 ringgit, under 15,000, so 14,000 something. And that was broken into 700 to 800 for the checkups. And yeah, well, itemized, so few hundred. Like I said, it can be reduced if you've already done a checkup or a blood test recently, then that doesn't have to be in. There's certain additional checks you can do to know about hereditary things. You don't have to, but I basically did all of that. So that's how it came up to almost 1,000 for the checkup part and a consultation. Then after that, the hormonal treatment and surgery itself is 12K plus. It's split into two payments. So one payment, paid about 6,000 plus, just to get the liquid for all the shots, and then you get a whole like freezer bag, a cold storage bag. They put it in the bag, and then you take it home, and then you keep it in the fridge, and every day you administer some shots. So you have to do that payment before you can take all those things home. And then after that, you do the second payment before they book you in for the surgery. Yeah. So in between, in the middle of that 2 weeks, and then also at the end of the 2 weeks, you will still keep going back in between for ultrasounds so that they can make sure that the eggs are growing as planned, just in case you don't do the shots correctly or you don't follow the timing you're supposed to follow. So they will scan to make sure everything is going on track. I follow everything, so everything was just smooth, and we just proceeded forward from that. So yeah, 3 payments came up to all around 14,000 plus.
I think it's important to also note, like what you said, right? The cost will really differ and vary according to the health condition that you currently have. So if you might have like PCOS or some other sort of like medical conditions, it might be a lot more given the additional treatments that they would have to like, administer to you before like getting you like ready for the process, right?
Yeah. So I don't know what would be the variations, because that was not something that, I mean, the consultation is very personal to you. But yeah, it can go up quite significantly. And also one important maybe thing to know is that if your eggs are not that many or healthy, or there's complications, you don't have a regular cycle, you may have to do a few rounds of the treatments and a few rounds of the surgery, which means full on everything from start to end again.
Oh, wow.
The whole emotional roller coaster, the whole same amount of shots, the same amount of price as well.
Wow.
And in fact, because like doctors would recommend usually, because of the average success rates, like say, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but usually you freeze 10, you might fertilize, but when they unfreeze it, there's also a rate of, there's also a chance that some of the eggs, when they unfreeze it, will not be viable. So let's say you freeze 10, they might be able to unfreeze 9 or 8 and fertilize those successfully. Then when they re-implant those, the 8 might not take, maybe only 4 would take when in the womb. So every stage of the process, there's a drop-off rate. So the ideal amount is that they want you to freeze 10 or more. So I was just under that number. I didn't hit 10, but it's just under that number. So they said it's still okay, but you might want to consider next year do another round. Yeah.
Just to make sure that like by the time you want
exactly
to fertilize, there's like the highest
success rate. And there are some people who in their first round, they're going to get 3 or 4. The doctors are really going to tell you, you really should do another round, because based on the drop off rate
It's
at
just a
each point of
probability
the
game as
process.
well.
It's statistically,
Yeah.
if you only harvested 3 or 4 eggs, low chance you're actually going to get a baby from that.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why you have to be, I mean, ask all these questions to the doctor upfront, they'll tell you. But also not every, and this is, when I talk to couples who have been through IVF as well, most of them don't get a child on the first round of IVF, which is exactly the same procedure, except the difference is there's the fertilization. So that's why they also go through several rounds of it, and it takes, because if each round you spend a couple months, so sometimes you do a few rounds, it can take like a whole year before you get pregnant. Yeah.
I'm actually really curious. Can the doctor tell you upfront from the results of the consultation and blood test that, you are most likely going to need that 1 extra round or that 2 extra round?
No,
or is it
they
kind
will
of as and when you go?
They will never
Yeah.
tell you. They will never tell you.
And I think this is important to know, because sometimes you think that, okay, the maximum that I'm going to spend is, 1 round, 15,000 ringgit. But you have also got to be prepared for the eventuality that after you finish your first round, the doctors might come back and advise you that, due to XYZ reasons, which might or might not be within their control, you need to buffer for another round if you want a higher probability.
Exactly. So just to give you my example, which may not even be the average, the doctor said everything checks-wise, everything, you're a prime candidate. Each point of the ultrasound, when I was taking the shots, they scanned, I think at some point there was even 16 eggs on both sides added together. Then they managed to take out like 14. But then they only managed to freeze 8. So from that process alone, you can see what's the drop off. Let alone freeze, unfreeze, fertilize, put into the womb. There's 3 more steps after that, There's 3 more steps after that, and each step, the number will go down. So it's like really hard it's impossible to tell, because each person is genetically unique. So the doctors will never guarantee you anything.
If they do, you should be worried, actually.
Success guarantee.
So, I mean, thank you so much, Chris, for taking us through this entire journey. It's been very refreshing, and I would say very enlightening from a more personal perspective, because it is something that, a lot of people, ourselves may be included, and audience, friends, close friends that we know, we started having these conversations about egg freezing and fertility as a whole. So if I was to ask you now, what is something that you wish someone told you, perhaps even before you embarked on this journey? What would that be? And maybe this is something that, our listeners would appreciate as well.
I don't think that I wish someone had told me something before I embarked on, because I think one person did tell me the most important thing, which was, like I mentioned, the older lady in her 40s who had done it and said, Crystal, I wish someone told me to do this sooner. Because by the time I did it, it was already more challenging. I had to do a few rounds. If I had done it younger, maybe I wouldn't have to. Maybe I would have more options. By the time I did it, my egg count was very low already. So when she told me that, it made me realize, she said, if you really decide that you want to have family at some point, then whatever your concerns are, financial, just prioritize it and just do it as soon as you can while you're younger. And doing it and then learning all these things about my body and my health made me really glad that even though people might say, you still have, at that point, right, you still have 3 years to go to hit 30 before you hit 35, you have plenty of time. But I think this is also the stage of life when all of us realize that life starts to really speed up. Being able to even see your friends on the weekend is like a treat, compared to in your 20s where you still can meet up every weekend, So even though you think you have 3 years, 5 years, however many years, life starts to really speed up at this point, and you don't have the time you think you have, because even just going through the checkups, then if you want to take a few months to get your body healthy, that's all going to take months. By the time you actually do the procedure, from the time you start your research, it might take half a year.
And also recognizing, I think, that there are a lot of things that you might not have control over, right? People having sickness, cancer, like you mentioned. These are all very real life scenarios that you don't have control over, and number 2, you would never see it coming.
Yeah.
And this is essentially a decision you make that gives yourself a chance to prolong that runway should life kind of hits you in the face. And,
Yeah.
we don't know what happens to us. So I think, that's definitely a really important sort of perspective and reminder. And another thing that we would love to know as well, was there anything that you discovered or learned about yourself through this, through this journey that sounds like a roller coaster, right? Like physically, mentally, everything.
Yeah.
So what do you learn about yourself?
I think I learned making such a big commitment and then being on this almost half-year journey from the time I started seriously looking into this and the time I actually did the surgery made me realize that being a mom is really something that's important to me. And not even to the extent of needing to be a biological mom. I think it's just the act of mothering, whether it's with my cats, foster cats, it could even be an adopted kid, but it made me realize that mothering is a part of me. And that's something that I want to prioritize in the next chapter, next season of my life. But it also made me get really real about, you can say you want to adopt, you can say you want to be a mom, but there are technical steps to make it happen. And adoption is a lot harder than going to a clinic and getting your eggs frozen. So I think I learned about myself that I really want to be a mom. And also, number two, that for me, I am quite pragmatic when it comes to these decisions. Yeah, like maximizing my options, being emotionally ready, being the right partner, being financially able to raise a child. All these things are important to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Chris. I mean, we've had so many of these conversations on a more personal level, and now for me to be on this other side of the mic and also to hear you amplify and share your story, this is a very special episode. I think I have to put it out there. On that note of ending and wrapping up the episode, Crystal, you would have seen this coming, but would love to ask you, what's one thing that you recently explored that surprised you?
Wow. I should have anticipated this and planned an answer, right?
I've had this question before.
What's one thing I've explored lately
that surprised you that you love to share
surprised
with
me?
our audience? And we wanted to make sure we put this in because I told Janice, I'm sure you've got something to share.
So I think both of you know me as a very on-the-go adventurous spirit, right? I've done all the things like ride a Vespa, have a diving license, I run. I think most people... I've just hiked Mount Kinabalu. I just did a duathlon. I just ran a 30 km. So most people see this very big, visible things that I do. But I think the biggest thing that has left an impact on me in the last few months that has been very new and enlightening for me is learning the power of letting other people support me. I've been recently part of a 3-month leadership program with this organization called Asia Works Malaysia, and it's a very radical kind of accountability mentoring community where people commit to their goals and they commit to supporting each other reach their goals. And I think it's the first time in my life where I could take a step back from being the leader, like I always am at work, in my communities, and let other people give to me that same level of support and even more. And I think that has been very humbling for a person who is always a doer and on the go, to just let myself rest or even let myself rely on someone else for support, because it also comes with learning how to trust and surrender that I might not always be the best one to do this. Maybe it's time to step aside and let someone else have the chance to do it. And just surrender to maybe, yes, you might have very high standards, but other people could also surprise you. Yeah.
And also recognizing perhaps that, you're always giving. There's also an opportunity to maybe take a step back and receive, because it's also when you have your cup filled that you can give more.
Absolutely. That's such a beautiful way sum it up. Yes.
So, just to wrap things off, Crystal, we just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. And we wanted to put it out there with our audience that, everyone's experience with egg freezing, as Crystal has alluded to many times, is going to be very personal, and it's also going to be very, very different. So always make sure that if you do decide to go ahead with this, to number one, consult your doctor and do your own research. I think that's what we wanted to put across here. But the sharing that Crystal has done has been very valuable in case you are someone like ourselves, maybe, who are also considering this as an option. One thing I wanted to say also is recognizing that fertility or infertility is also not just a woman's problem. And I think this is maybe a topic for another day, perhaps. But it's a shared problem. It can be something that either the men or women face, in this act of conceiving for a child in the future. So don't forget to seek further information by consulting with medical professionals if this is something that you would like to consider for your own body.
Yeah. And once again, Crystal, we thank you so much for your vulnerability, your boldness, your courage to just share this very important conversation, one that is not spoken about enough with us today and with all our listeners. And we hope that all of you enjoyed this episode. Leave a comment if you resonate, and feel free to reach out to us if you've got any specific questions. To Crystal, we'll leave her social media handle in the episode description. So just be sure to check this out and let us know your thoughts when this comes out.
See you soon.
Bye!
If you stuck around to the end of this episode, we want to say thank you for exploring with us. And if you don't already, please follow us on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review, and most importantly, share this episode with your friends.
We'd love to hear from you. So you can also connect with us on Instagram using the Instagram handle Explore This Podcast. ACTSPLORE This Podcast. New episodes for Explore This drops every alternate Mondays at 8 p.m. See you then!